what does that can accomplish? But at the same time, it's like, then I like the other side of the argument, which I have no idea like how to feel about.
Sean, do you think we're ready to get going and people keep trickling in?
Yep, I think we should get started.
All right. Just to start out, everybody, just go ahead and mute everyone while we're doing introductions, so forth. But thank you for joining us. My name is Charles Kenyon. I'm the current FIT board president and the PGY-3 and Rising Chief at the University of Washington. It's a much different time here than I anticipated when we first planned this webinar. I know it's been a stressful weekend, several months for everybody, but a lot of the original spirit of this session was to welcome all the rising interns to the Physiatry family and show you guys some support and do some question and answer and hear from a handful of all-stars that have just gone through the process of internship and learn and share experiences. But you know, I think we'd be remiss to ignore some of the tough times we're going through in terms of diversity and racial relations and with the pandemic in general. So, you know, I thought briefly of what we would do with this session, but I think it's even more so important to touch base with everybody and really welcome everybody into physiatry, show you a little bit more how strong the physiatry family is, and talk about some of the resources that the Academy has to offer moving forward. So again, welcome everybody. It's exciting to see a full panel. Tonight's topic will be success in PGY-1 year, panel discussion. And we're going to tailor the discussion primarily to the rising interns, recently graduated folks, but I did want to include an open invitation to medical students that are in the process and interested in learning more about internship, and I think you'll get a lot of good advice that'll help you out in your clerkships. So we'll kind of go through instructions. I think any questions that come up going through the chat function, but if you're in the chat and I call on you, feel free to join video and audio and speak up, just because I did want to have this be as interactive as possible. And it's nice to see everybody's faces for sure. All right, so just wanted to start by getting a little bit of awareness. What is the FIT Council? So that is our physiatry and training group, and it's a resident fellow voice within the Academy of American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. We focus on some in-training advocacy and some leadership training. Just as you move through your careers, I encourage you to keep an eye out for opportunities volunteering with the Academy, either through FIT itself or other opportunities that may come up. Here's a nice shot of our group this year. I have myself down there in rocking bow tie, and one of our panelists tonight, Dr. Fogarty. Are you in there? Yeah, they are hiding in the corner. Your picture was covering me up there, but nice smiling faces there. Introducing you guys to some other resources that we've offered. We've been doing the last couple of years is PGY-1 advice from PM&R Residence series on the website, and it's just a helpful collection of about 5 articles now. We're always looking to add to it, but always encourage you to get familiar with the Academy website, search through, and I think there's some pretty helpful advice buried in those articles. Also, just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, all the different volunteer opportunities that might be available. Certainly leadership opportunities within the council itself, or writing articles, whether for Knowledge Now or a recent newsletter. There's opportunities that come up fairly frequently. As you get into your PGY-2 year and beyond, learning more about the ambassador program, and again, just kind of perusing through the website and identifying those available resources. Two things in particular. One thing that's tough is in your internship year, depending on where you are, you may or may not have funded academy membership, but I do think there are a lot of benefits towards joining the academy, continuing your medical student membership as an intern, and then beyond. Things like the Phys Forum, keep it plugged into discussions in your member communities and interest groups, just so you can stay in touch with what's going on. Some, we'll talk about how during some of the feelings can evolve during intern year, and not being you've matched for physiatry, but may or may not be working in that setting directly. So kind of keeping tabs on things, the Phys Forum can be super helpful. And then also Knowledge Now is a resource that I used as an intern for, learn a little bit more about the different rehab diagnoses that might come up in a stroke patient or so on. A nice quick resource that I encourage everybody to dig into and learn more. So getting into the fun part now, tonight's panelists, really excited to welcome everybody. We were able to find somebody to talk about their experiences all across the country. So we have Kripali Chokshi over in New York at Mount Sinai West as a current PGY-1. Alex Fogarty, current PGY-2 at Washington University in St. Louis, and she's also one of our current FIT liaisons serving on the membership committee. Chris Ha is a dear friend of mine, and we've known each other since medical school over at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine. He's currently a PGY-1 in the categorical program at Mayo Clinic. Then Aubrey Fairfull is over here at University of Washington, and we're excited to welcome her after completing her categorical year into the full-on physiatry family here in a couple of weeks. And just a quick thank you to everybody again for joining. Any questions that may come up, the member services at AAPM&R.org is a good resource to get plugged in. And just some of our social media, Twitter handles there as well. Just because I do know we probably have a little bit of a diverse audience, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Fogarty, and she's just going to do a quick run through of different internship options before we get into the discussion itself.
Great. Well, thanks, Dr. Kenyon, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you all tonight. This next couple minutes is more so going to be geared towards the medical students that are with us tonight. Charles, are you able to hear me right now, just as a double check before we get started?
Yeah, I see the screen, and good.
Wonderful.
Technically sufficient, yeah.
Wonderful. So just quickly, we wanted to sort of run through for the med students out there what some of the options are for your PGY-1 year. And I know that there's a lot of information available on the internet, and you probably have mentors. So we'll keep this pretty straightforward. And if you have any other questions related to this, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to speak more in depth as to any situations that you might be faced with. So I'm going to run through some of the different categories here. So first off, in terms of categories, obviously there's a transitional stream for an internship year opportunity. And I've posted here an example, kind of a schedule as to what that would look like to help you sort of envision your year. So in this type of a schedule, I guess the mantra for a TY year is that essentially it's a very global, well-rounded sort of an experience. You might do several months of an inpatient medicine service, several months of an emergency medicine, some ambulatory services, and then typically in a TY year, you're going to see a lot of elective time, which can be really helpful for people who are obviously going to be going into an advanced PM&R position as a PGY-2, because that might be a good opportunity for you to do other things that might be relevant to PM&R, whether that's neurology, whether that's research, ICU or surgery, anything that you think is going to add to your skill. Typically you have a little bit more flexibility. So as far as the buzzwords, as I mentioned, people tend to refer to TY years as being global and well-rounded experiences. I've listed some common, pros and cons here. So typically, as I mentioned, these tend to be flexible. You get a wide range of exposure. However, you might have to do surgical time, which for some people is not appealing. And what's important to note too is that these TY years have become increasingly competitive. Not that that should dissuade you from applying, but you are going to be often faced with co-applicants from some of the more competitive medical subspecialties such as dermatology, radiation oncology, who are all kind of hoping to attain these types of slots. Also, this might be appealing to some people, but for others, it might be a bit of a con that you don't have as much of a traditional team experience. You tend to be more one-on-one with an attending or kind of working with a fellow on the individual basis, so you might not have that traditional teaching team experience. It's important for you to ask, I think, when you do your interviews and when you're researching individual programs, how well the residents feel prepared, because you're not working in that team. Sometimes people will say, I got a great experience, I'm really, really well prepared. And other times you'll get different answers. So that's really important to elucidate. Also, how independent do people feel operating after the end of their transitional years? Another thing to bear in mind, because you tend to be, or a lot of the TY experiences, you may be a little bit more hands-off as compared to some of the other internship experiences. So some questions to consider asking. The second type of experience would be, your classic, or the second type of screen would be your traditional prelim medicine year. So here's an example schedule where you'd spend, 6 months of inpatient internal medicine. You might spend a few months in the ICU, either in a medical ICU or a surgical ICU, or a cardiac one, as I have listed here. And then you probably are going to have a little bit of ambulatory time as well. Typically, you're not going to have a continuity clinic because obviously, unlike a categorical medicine resident, you won't be staying on, you'll be going to PM&R. So some, classic buzzwordy type of things that go along with the prelim year in medicine is people tend to say you'll be well prepared. This is the most classic internship experience. And it's this traditional medicine type of stream. I think some of the pros that I've listed here, again, these are very individual, but a pro would be you get to train like an internal medicine resident, which can make you feel like you're very prepared to manage any patient that might land in an acute rehab setting. You also get the opportunity to see and to be hands-on managing acute care, like acute patients in the ICU setting. And then for some people, another pro might be that you have that experience in a traditional teaching structure. So you get to learn from your peers more directly. Obviously, for others, cons might be the fact that your hours might be a little bit longer than a TY year, or you may have to do more than one ICU month, which depends on the person. Again, it's a really a personal thing. So when you're interviewing or you're looking up preliminary year programs, some things to consider asking would be, how much ICU time months are there going to be? Is that something that's important to you or not? And then it also can be helpful to try to figure out what the structure is for a preliminary year medicine resident compared to a categorical stream internal medicine resident. And that becomes important when trying to figure out what the call schedule will look like and what happens for you as a prelim when the categorical medicine residents, for instance, go to their continuity clinics. Like, where do you go? Do you stay on the floors? Do you go to a clinic as well? So those are just some things to consider asking. Last, I should say third on the list is our prelim surgical years. So here's an example schedule. Again, these are highly variable. So this is just some example here where you might spend your entire year on different surgical floors, and you might have a little bit of elective time, but again, it's going to tend to be on the lighter end of the elective spectrum. And you also might have to spend some time in the ICU or critical care setting. in terms of what this is known for, a surgical year tends to be traditionally labeled as being the hardest experience. It's a more traditional surgical experience. So for a lot of people, you know, they see it as a pro to be able to train to manage surgical patients, because in an acute rehab setting, you'll likely see a lot of people who have overlapping diagnoses. So that can be a huge advantage. Again, you'll be able to manage some acute patients. And depending on how much time you spend in the OR versus you spend on the floor, you should get a pretty good sense as to really doing a lot of the bread and butter medicine that would be required for you to feel comfortable with before starting your PGY-2 year. The cons, I think, are quite well known. Tends to be, you know, the long hours, the early mornings, which, you know, appeals to some people certainly. And then depending on how much you like the operating room, this could be a pro or a con. And it's an important question to ask yourself. Do you like being in the OR, or would you rather spend time in a floor setting? So I think that's a question that will probably direct whether or not you are, you know, gravitating more towards a medicine or a surgical year. When interviewing at programs or looking them up, it's sometimes helpful to figure out what the expectation is for a prelim intern. Do you go to all the cases? Do you stay on the floor? Because that's really going to determine what your experience is like. The other thing that I put here is, you know, what's the consulting culture like? So for instance, on some surgical floor teams, for every general medical issue, especially at larger academic centers, you'll consult internal medicine, you'll consult endocrinology, or you'll consult all these specialty services. So the reason why that is important is if the culture is really geared towards consulting everybody, just make sure that you do spend the appropriate time getting to know those medical issues inside and out, because you will be likely expected to know how to manage at least the basics of those things when you do get to your PGY-2 year. And then last but not least, I think, are the categorical programs. So certainly in terms of PM&R program distribution, categorical options are becoming more and more common, especially over the last 3 to 4 years. There's been definitely an increase in number of those spots. So these experiences are very heterogeneous though, so it's really important to ask when you're interviewing, you know, what exactly you're going to be getting in terms of the schedule. Some programs tend to be a very traditional preliminary internal medicine year, where you'll spend that year in the hospital associated with your PM&R program, whereas others, it can tend to look a little bit more like a TY. So it's important to sort of get a sense as to what that's like. Some pros, though, are obviously that you get to spend time with your co-residents earlier, you get to be exposed to PM&R earlier, theoretically. So for instance, when I was a PGY-1, I was in a categorical stream and was able to do a month of brain injury medicine as an intern, which was helpful, and kind of get to know the system a little bit sooner than, you know, other people who were advanced residents. And then research as well. Since you're going to already be there, you can be plugged in faster. And then I'll just leave you here with this. Of course, I'm sure everybody is very well familiarized with the NRMP outcomes, charting outcomes. This is a really good resource for anybody looking to find some matched data. Here, this graph is essentially showing us the number of spots for prelim medicine, prelim surgery, and then for categorical PGY-1 spots. And it shows you how many spots there are in the country and then how many were filled in the 2020 match. So just in terms of planning purposes, that can also be important to know. Just in terms of if you have any geographical restrictions or you're couples matching and you have to try to think strategically, always having a sense as to what, you know, what the spots look like and the distribution can be helpful. So, and then this is the last point I'll make here. I think I was reading a lot about how a lot of medical students or people who are applying this cycle sometimes can be confused about how to rank your different prelim years. So you will rank in your list your primary specialty first in order. So you might rank your PM&R program, and then every sub-rank for non-categorical for non-categorical programs, you'll then be prompted to create a sub-rank for your PGY-1 year. And some people at the end of their rank list might even put their preliminary years at the bottom, just sort of to hedge their bets to make sure that they have the best opportunities of matching. So certainly happy to answer any questions if they come up. I'll pass it back to you, Charles. So thank you for that, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, guys, we'll get into the fun part now with the panel discussion. Again, feel free to comment in the box with any questions, or pop on the video and raise your hand, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. But I think I want to start with a question for the PGY-1s, and just what are you guys looking forward to the most come June 1st when you join your PM&R programs? Chris, can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to volunteer. Really, I think, you know, it's been interesting for me just because I'm in a categorical position. So I've kind of seen my PM&R colleagues and co-interns and seniors from a little bit of a distance. And so really just getting to know my future co-residents and kind of having everyone at Mayo, because there's only 2 categoricals here. We have quite a large program. We have about 60 to 80 interns because I'm in the preliminary internal medicine track. And so it's only me and another intern. His name is Josh. And so we actually have 6 more joining our program next year. So I think biggest thing is just really getting to meet and kind of hang out and get to know all my future friends and co-residents.
Yeah, I would say the same. You kind of stole my answer. I think being a categorical, I do have a few more people that are the categoricals, and we have 1 prelim here as well in medicine. So the 4 of us have gotten to know each other pretty well, but it'll be really cool to see the new people as well and get to know my seniors. Also looking forward to not having a 28-hour call anymore. So yeah, I'm excited to just get into rehab specific things.
Yeah, I actually did an internal medicine prelim year, and location was a big factor for me in terms of choosing where I wanted to be for the 1 year. So I stayed in New York City because that's where I wanted to do my rehab residency, and also my family and friends are here. So I figured it would be a year for me to kind of spend with everyone around me.
Now, rewinding to a year ago, any tips for that transition period, or anything that you found particularly scary that maybe wasn't as scary once you got your feet on the ground and started to get to work as an intern?
I would say for me, I was pretty intimidated just, you know, starting intern year, starting the workflow of being a resident doctor. And I will say that I guess my biggest encouragement is it's going to be okay. Just, I think if I could go back to me like June 15th, June 20th, I would just say, Chris, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. My hope is that the programs that you all are going into will, you know, provide a really smooth transition and will be very supportive in kind of like gradually bringing you into your workflow. And I would say that for me, it was quite a smooth transition. Just Mayo is very, very good at kind of gradually building up your responsibilities and introducing you to the specific tasks of the intern. And eventually you'll look at yourself and you'll be like, oh my gosh, it's August, it's September, and I'm actually doing it. I'm putting in orders, I'm ordering Tylenol, and I'm not freaking out. And so I think, you know, it's definitely gonna be this built up anticipation, but I would say just breathe, be calm, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think the scary thing for me was like looking at call and taking pages and having to answer those in an efficient and intelligent way, and being kind of like the imposter syndrome that a lot of us suffer from in medicine, worrying that I wasn't going to have the answers and someone was going to die. I mean, I think in some cases that might be true, but usually there's a few buffers between you and someone actually dying in terms of your seniors and other support. So once you get in there and see that there's a lot of support around you, I think it's a little less scary. and I wish I would have been a little more confident in myself. I think it becomes more apparent to you as you go throughout the year that you are learning things. And sometimes it can feel like you're kind of just slugging through, but you actually do learn a lot as you go along, and you pick up little things that are really helpful as you go. So I would just say, I wish I would have told myself to trust my gut and to trust myself a little more as I was going through the process.
Yeah, I agree with that point. That was exactly what I was going to say. About a year ago, I was afraid that my medicine wasn't strong enough, that I forgot stuff during 4th year, that I couldn't like keep track of everything for all my patients. But there really is someone with you every step of the way. And your senior knows your patients really well, and like your attending will always be there to like answer any questions. So yeah, I wish I hadn't been so afraid and had just like asked every question that I had in the beginning and just gotten out of the way and gotten the answers.
Internship was a few minutes ago for me, but I would say I echo everything that everybody has said thus far. But I would say the biggest thing that I wish I had done starting, on the first day is just asking a ridiculous amount of questions about literally every little thing that I didn't understand, because you never really get that opportunity again to be the intern where the expectation is that you don't know anything. And it's a great expectation to walk into, because it really frees you for the first time in a lot of your medical education, where you're not trying to impress anybody. You're not trying to get a letter of recommendation. You're just trying to do your job. And in order to do your job, you have to start to learn what you're doing. So it's okay to ask those unabashedly silly questions, or things that you're like, well, maybe I should really not ask the attending. Maybe I should ask my co-intern first, or not ask the resident. I would just say, not only be confident in yourself, but also speak up when you have something, just because the opportunities for learning are abundant, and it's the time to make the most of it.
And I would just reinforce that point that a couple of you guys brought up, that you are never going to be alone, especially right off the bat. Even if you're in the hospital by yourself, there's always an upper level that's available by phone. Sometimes it's scary to call an attending, but I guarantee you everybody would rather be woken up in the middle of the night and be there to support you and talk through things. So a lot of things that you might be hesitant to do, just ask. And I think that it carries out for your whole career in education too, even beyond residency. Even there's always somebody there to support you, always a mentor to turn to. There's always a resource there, even if it's you're not a resident. There's always a senior nurse. You talk to the charge nurse, get some advice there. Work with your consult teams. Alex, do you have any about the transition from kind of PGY-1 to PGY-2? Was there anything that surprised you about that transition last year?
So my internship year was a little bit different, I think, than everybody else's. Technically, I did a preliminary medicine year here at WashU in St. Louis, but actually the structure of it was a little bit more like a TY, in the sense that I spent 6 months on an internal medicine service, but was not on a team structure, was with like a hospitalist team. So I worked one-on-one with the attending all the time. So for me, taking call as a PGY-2 was like a really important transition point. And some people who will do a traditional prelim medicine year, or traditional surgical year, might have a little bit less of a hard time with this. But it was interesting for the first time to take call for such a large amount of patients. And I remember that being a little bit intimidating at the beginning of PGY-2. But I think the same things really stand strong. Like there's always somebody there to help you if you get stuck with something. Even now, being a more, senior resident along the spectrum, there's always your co-residents, there's always a fellow, sometimes there's, the attendings are always available, and people, I think, would rather, no matter your level of seniority, rather have you ask the questions and kind of ask for help early. than like kind of let something simmer for longer. So that's just, I think, something that holds true, you know, first day of PGY-1, but is still true as kind of you move through the ranks as well.
All right, looks like we have our first audience question here. For those who have still have open rotations / electives upcoming in their PGY-1 year, what do you recommend taking? Any rotations such as neurology, ortho, neurosurgery, in-service rotation with PM&R, anything that you feel like was particularly helpful through your intern year, you know, not only for rising interns, but also for medical students looking to fill out their schedule for the next year?
I thought my neurology rotation was, I did 2 weeks in neurology. That was really helpful. I did a lot of general medicine. I think primary care clinic might actually be kind of useful, especially for general MSK. I don't know anyone that did ortho, but that would definitely, I'm sure it would be super helpful, and rheumatology as well.
Yeah, as part of our categorical year here, we do rheumatology month, we do an ortho month, which is clinic, and we also do pain month. I found all of them really helpful. Rheumatology was surprisingly like super helpful. And I think ortho was helpful in the clinic sense to kind of brush up on an MSK exam and think about the anatomy and those things that can be helpful in rehab. I think it's also a nice break to get away from medicine for a few months if you can, or a month or whatever you're given. Do something that you think you'll enjoy just to kind of break up the tougher months.
Yeah, I definitely echo just doing something that you're interested in, something that you may not be able to do again, or maybe you had an interest in medical school but didn't get to pursue. At Mayo, we're lucky we have 5 electives that we kind of have free reign in. And because we have so many different subspecialties, I was able to do like a sleep medicine month and a month in integrative medicine, MSK ultrasound, also radiology. So I kind of kept it really broad, but I think the biggest thing is to try and get different perspectives outside of your kind of core medicine, to kind of round out your perspective, and also just to try new things and see what you like and what you don't like before you get to PGY-2.
I agree with what everyone said. I think the thing that I found the most useful was as part of our categorical year here at WashU, we do 2 months of inpatient neurology, which might sound like a lot, but in terms of like stroke management, TBI stuff, it was really helpful to see what that looks like on the acute setting. And then the transition of taking those patients as a PGY-2 in a rehabilitation setting was, it just felt really continuous because I had a good understanding of what, you know, the acute management was of the thing. So it was just sort of like a natural extension to the learning. So you get a good sense as to why certain medications are on board versus others, and kind of like what, you know, what to expect like long-term and prognostically. So you can kind of really spend a lot of time learning like the rehab piece when you're in rehab and you're not trying to cram other knowledge into your brain about the acute care management stuff that might be useful to know as a background information. And then I also had the opportunity to do rheumatology and radiology, and I would say both of those things were also really helpful.
And I would echo what Alex said about having a strong neurology experience. There's something that I missed out on just the way my schedule fell in place for my intern year, and that was probably the biggest challenge for me in transitioning into a program here at UW that is very neuro rehab heavy, particularly in our first year, kind of having to learn the finer details of the neuro exam on the fly and things like that kind of caught me off guard. But also in terms of like specific rotations and where you think you'll learn while you get most prepared, I would say that the rotations where I got the most from were probably the ones where I felt like I was going to dread it the most going into it. Things like being in the ER, particularly like night shifts, ICU shifts, things that were like really outside my comfort zone. I think hands down, those were the ones that really prepared me moving forward. So I guess I would kind of pass that along. Are there any experiences that you guys had that you're guiding or particularly were difficult, but were really beneficial and made you a stronger position going forward?
The emergency room wasn't my jam. I, it was okay. Like, it was a great learning experience, and it did end up being really helpful to kind of take, especially like the MSK things I tried to jump on if there was the opportunity, and take something from the very beginning and work through it and create a differential and all those good things. The ED also was a good experience with like working closely with nursing and learning communication skills that way. So I think especially with the pressure of like an acute setting, granted this was during March, so it was literally the beginning of COVID. So it was a little bit different of an experience probably than other times during the year or the century. But I think overall it was something that I didn't particularly like love, but I'm glad I did it because I picked up a lot of nuances that I don't think I would have gotten in other experiences.
Another question here about, and it's been an interesting year in terms of trying to schedule that, but in terms of step 3 or level 3, when you scheduled and how you studied for those, what resources you use. And I know here at our program that we have several people who, I got an email the other day, one of our incoming PGY-2s has rescheduled their step 3, I think she said 4 times now, and finally postponed it into August or September. So I don't know, how did you guys approach that this past year?
Yeah, for me, I guess my general recommendation, if it's possible, is to try and take it earlier or sooner than later. I actually took mine the second week of March, and I think I missed the Prometric Center closing due to COVID by a day. So I remember like I took on a Friday or a Monday and a Friday, and then Saturday they sent the email saying we're gonna close it indefinitely. So it was a close call. And I'd say by March, I was just a little bit more tired and I didn't want to study anymore. I didn't want to come home after medicine and try and cram in questions. I think the general approach still applies compared to step 1 and step 2. I think you're studying, the amount of time you're spending is probably a lot less just because you're studying a lot just on your general rotations. So I don't think you have to spend a lot of time outside, reading textbooks or doing as many question banks. I would just stick to one question bank. For me, because I'm a DO, I took the Complex level 3, so I just used ComQuest, I think. I thought that was sufficient and I passed. So that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah, I took mine really early in November. I feel like saying really early compared to other people. I'm really glad I did that. It kind of just took the weight off the rest of the year, but it was enough into intern year that I felt like I had enough medicine under my belt and a little bit of experience to help me with like the questions. I just used UWorld, and pretty much it. There's the weird CCS cases. There's an online resource that you can buy. I think it's like $70 that gives you feedback about those cases as you do them and kind of what percentage you would have gotten correct. I found those helpful as well. So I supplemented UWorld with that. But UWorld does have a case load as well, and they just don't tell you like the percentage right. They just give you the answers afterwards. But yeah, I would recommend taking it before the holidays if you can, just to kind of be able to enjoy those if you're not working, and the rest of the year less hanging over your head.
And I would just echo the virtues of getting it done sooner than later. If you've done a couple medicine months and you're feeling really strong in your fundamentals, it's probably the preparation you need. Alex, kind of a tangent, but do you have any advice for any international folks in terms of navigating the visa process and things like that?
In general, Charlie, or
yeah, as general or specific as you'd like.
yeah, so I'm Canadian, is my disclaimer, which means that I'm really nice to everybody and I live in an igloo. Just kidding. But in any case, I would just say that if there's any, IMGs who are applying to the match this year more than ever, just apply. Just everything is a little bit of a mess, so you just want to be extra early and extra conscientious, which is really not, particularly enticing, especially with COVID going on. Everything is in flux in terms of J1 visas or different other, training program routes that you might be in terms of how it changed the structure of my intern year and taking step 3, it didn't really have much effect at all. I still have to take, we have to take all the USMLEs. So definitely echo everybody else's advice in terms of, how to study and the timing of that. But yeah, I think everybody's situation is a little bit different. If you're a foreign applicant, just give yourself extra time with all of your exams, extra time with trying to navigate the prometric situation, which is evolving every week, and just know that you're definitely not alone in that, and a lot of people are going through it. So I think it'll probably be a little bit more of a flexible year, but reach out to your mentors because you're not alone in this.
Kripali, for those who are either in New York or heading to New York or matched to New York and didn't expect to be going to New York, are you able to speak to, I think you said that you guys are getting back to more routine schedule now. Can you speak a little bit to the experience of being in New York during the pandemic and what to expect for people who are heading out that direction?
So when things got really bad, all the services were kind of called in and were on general medicine floors. And there was actually a lot of support and help, no matter what your knowledge base was. So you were able to take care of patients, and you had to be kind of resourceful and just very flexible with what you were doing. But generally right now things have slowed down a lot, and the services have returned back to what they were normally doing. And the amount of COVID patients that are coming in have decreased, or they're in one specific unit. So in terms of just doing your PGY-1 either in medicine or TY, I think you'll have a lot less exposure if you're starting in July. And if you're doing a categorical or going into rehab right now, then I think you might actually be able to return to rehab. I know that NYU initially had been pulled into medicine, but now they're back on the floors, I heard, on their rehab floors. So I wouldn't worry too much about doing things outside your own scope of practice.
Awesome, thank you. How about turning a little bit to wellness? What have you guys been doing to stay sane? What kind of new routines, new habits you've taken up during PGY-1 year? Chris, I know you, like myself, have a child out there and some other things going on in relation to that, but we'd just love to hear how people are staying connected and grounded.
Yeah, for me, really fortunate to have my family with me. And like Charlie said, I have an 18-month-old and we actually have a daughter on the way. So I'd say the biggest thing for wellness, my recommendation is just try and find your community as soon as you can. I was lucky that, I found a really good friend here, my co-intern, Josh Romero. We pretty much hit it off early June, July, and he's kind of the guy that I go to outside of my family, my immediate family, whenever I have any issues or concerns or just want to vent or just try to process things. I think intern year can be kind of isolating if you let it, especially for us who are technically off service for the majority of the year before you get to your actual chosen specialty. And so, finding your community, whether that's in a church or community service or just hanging out with some residents as soon as you can and as often as you can. And then making sure that you try and separate, life outside of work and having some routines that kind of create some new habits and just remind yourself that there's life out of there. So for me, I picked up running. It's easy to be outside in Minnesota. So we started a vegetable garden. We started a routine where right before we put down our son Alden, we always do a 1 mile hike up the hill. So just the small things that really try to, keep your perspective of what's most important in your life and remind yourself that, there's life outside the hospital.
I agree. Just making sure that you're also doing some sort of exercise throughout the year. It can be really hard, but if you join a gym or find someone to work out with, that kind of helps, just because intern year is so stressful. And then I always made sure if I had one day off in the week that I would plan to do something that day, whether it was like see a friend or go outside or just I wanted to make sure I didn't just lounge the whole day and then like not make the most of my one day off. So I think that kind of helps maintain your sense of sanity and who you are outside of being an intern.
For me, I moved across the country for residency. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so connecting with my family and my friends back on the East Coast has been really important for me during intern year, which can be hard with like the time difference and our scheduling, but setting aside time and even scheduling it has become a priority, and I think that maintaining that is really important, even when you might not feel like talking to anyone else or you're just tired. Trying to put in that effort and still connecting ends up being really helpful for, at least for me, for my mental health. Volleyball was really important to me in medical school, so I continued that here up until COVID closed the gyms. I got into rock climbing as well and doing yoga. So just finding time just for myself, again, outside of medicine, where I'm not thinking about medical problems, has been really helpful.
Alex, what does a skier in the Midwest do for their free time these days?
Yeah, so I used to ski race competitively, and that was sort of my big life accomplishment before I turned to medicine. So certainly moving to the Midwest where we have a lot of opportunity was a little bit challenging, but at the end of the day, I think like what the others have echoed, just to try to find that thing, whatever it is in your life that helps you disassociate your work life from your home life. And for me, that's always been exercise. So I've, really channeled that into running. Here in St. Louis, we have this amazing park that's literally adjacent to the hospital. That's one of the biggest city parks. It's super safe. So one of the things that, I would do during intern year all the time would be, as soon as I got back from work, I just made the habit to force myself, put on my running shoes and just go for a run. And like 15 minutes, 20 minutes later, all of the problems from the day, at least for me, were kind of at least somewhat by the wayside. And then I could refocus on the things I had to do later, whether that was family related or studying. I also think that for me, being in a categorical program, well, I should say half categorical, half advanced, but being an intern, sort of being separated from sort of the PM&R family, was a little bit strange because, as some others have mentioned, it can be a little isolating. What was really helpful for me was not only did I have my other like co-resident categorical to sort of band with and become good friends with, but we also really made a point of reaching out to the upper level residents in our program and really trying to bridge the gap between the class years between interns and all the way up to seniors. And we have had a wonderful wellness chief that really tried to get everybody together. And I would recommend that as well if you have the opportunity to connect, whether it's by email, whether it's by Zoom or in person with your PM&R family at your primary program. That might also help kind of with that sense of isolation and give you a greater sense of purpose as you're kind of navigating through, you know, a specialty that you're not necessarily signed up to do. It can be helpful.
Thanks, everyone. I do want to acknowledge just that you know, I see everyone's questions from the medical student perspective in terms of the challenges and stresses everybody's going through with disruptions to how rotations and letters of recommendation, the application process in general, you know, going to virtual. And you know, I acknowledge that it's different. I'd say that we're at program level, you know, trying to figure out what that's going to look like too, and you know, we're here to understand and support everybody. I don't think we're going to have time to get into that tonight, but stay tuned. The fact that you guys are all here means that you're already a step ahead of the game and plugged in and eager. And I think, you know, we've just having faith that the work that you've put in is going to play out, and you've done everything you can to put yourself in a position of success. But you know, we're all kind of focusing on this area of uncertainty, and you know, we're going to work through this together. And I think there will be a lot of positives that come out of the process too. But one, maybe two more questions here tonight. One, any must-have apps for intern year, and favorite resources, and then maybe what's your white coat look like? Aubrey, I don't know if you wear a white coat on the medicine service. I think I've lost mine. That's just our hospital culture. But just yeah, what are some of the go-to resources for surviving academically for you guys?
I used UpToDate a lot, like especially during the day on wards. If I had to look up like a dose for a medication, it's just easily accessible. In terms of apps, I don't know that I really used a lot other than like MD Calc. I think for the emergency room, if you have to do one of those rotations, there's a couple that are helpful for like differentials for different presentations. But yeah, I didn't really use a lot of apps. It was more, I think other residents are a good resource actually. I think there's like a stigma of asking a lot of questions like Alex said, but I think overall, like using other people around you to ask questions, and if you don't know something, nurses can be a really great resource if you want to get information about your patients. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I heard Doximity is actually a good app to have too on your phone. I think they give you like a blocked number if you have to call a patient's family from your own cell phone. And I think they actually give you your own fax number too. If you have to get like records and you need it faxed to yourself, they can fax it to your phone.
Yeah, I mostly, I think, use UpToDate. There is an app on the phone, so that's really handy. And then MD Calc. Other than that, I don't know if I had too many app resources. I think the more important thing is, yeah, try to ask your residents what they've used and what resources come in handy. I think I probably reference more PDFs that were handed down to me, and even like emails with little bullet points for the rotations. I think those I relied on heavily, and I still rely on to this day. And so I think it's definitely program specific. And Mayo, we're lucky. We actually have like this amazing encyclopedia. It's called Ask Mayo Expert, and it's actually just Mayo specific. So you can't log into it outside. So I would just use that. But find out what works at your program, what people have used, and undoubtedly the ones that have gone through those rotations, they'll have, you know, really good resources.
I think I use similarly like UpToDate and MD Calc. The only other app that I had on my phone that I think was really useful is either the UWorld or the Comlex app. So sometimes if I had like 5 minutes of downtime during the day, you just can like whip through like 2 questions or read up on an answer that you were finishing last night. Just a good way of, keeping up with the studying, even when things get busy. Just finding like that spare moment in the day to just do a little bit of extra learning can be helpful. And then more as a PGY2, actually, I've been using an app called Prime, which is helpful for, you can select basically different authors that you're interested in following or different journals that you're interested in following. And so whenever there's a new publication for that journal or for that author, it will like ping your phone. So that way, if there's a researcher that you're really interested in or an area that you're trying to stay on top of the literature, it can automatically forward you those updates so that way you don't have to go searching and heaving through PubMed when you don't have time for that. So I wish I had kind of started that a little bit earlier, especially on specific rotations where, the expectation was that you would, look up, some primary articles to help bolster your argument as to, what your differential was going to be. Having something that made like literature a little bit more accessible would have been nice to have. So I recommend that one too.
I'll say, just looping back to one of the places we started the conversation, never be afraid to ask. It might be as simple as calling a nurse who knows the patient well, or utilizing your pharmacists or social workers, just utilizing the whole team, any upper level residents. And I'm like Alex, I just can't. She's definitely more organized than I am, but I wish I had a good way to keep everything straight and keep my resources. I'm the kind of person that has to Google search my NPI number every time I have to write it down. So as much as you can, write things down and have it in one place. I think those little efficiencies really add up throughout the day. But we'll pause for a quick second for any final questions. But thanks again to the panel. Thanks everybody who tuned in. We did record the session, and we'll also, like I said, I am really understand the medical student perspective right now, and just from a personal perspective, we're just kind of working through getting the PGY2s on board and here, and then from there we'll be focusing a lot more on the recruitment piece. So appreciate all you guys' patience, and welcome to the family. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.